The average person in 1840 spent just under 8 hours a day in unmediated contact with other people. Now we're down to the average 25-year-old male spends less than 30 minutes a day in relationship with other people. I see circling really participating in this one, recognizing that there's a kind of crisis in relationship right now, is existing and in being aware of that, and in some sense helping shape what it means to have relationships now.
There would be a riot if I didn't take the opportunity to ask you about The container is now open. We did it, folks. We did it finally on the podcast. Guy Sengstock, the key founder, discoverer of the circling practice. Over about the last 30 years, he has helped spread it far and wide, and he came on the show to talk about that history. And I know a lot of you want to hear it straight from his mouth. What has it been like to run the Circling Institute here in the last few years, and the sort of difficulties that have come up in maintaining the circling practice as a practice? And there's more, Guy, where that came from. Next week, we have him going deep into the philosophical implications of the practice of circling, which is, for my money, the greatest meditative spiritual practice that is available today. Whether you're brand new to circling or you've been doing it for 15 years, this is a really, really, really great interview. Thank you for joining us. Let's go. How do you discover circling? What's going on that leads to this thing emerging into history?
And discovering and emerging is the right word, right? The first thing to get is like, at no point was anyone like, hey, I got an idea. Let's do a thing. Let's do this thing called circling. And we can just sit across from each other and like say weird things to each other and have emotions. And right now, no one at any point, like, it was no one's idea, right? It was something that literally started to take place, a pattern that started to take place that we started to recognize over time, right? Until there was a moment where Jerry and I in particular, like, really kind of committed to it, right? But really, circling was circling about even its own origin, right? That's something interesting about circling. It's got this fractal element. It's like the process of circling, the way it started was like similar to the process of circling, right? It's this kind of emergent thing that you kind of find yourself already belonging to and inside of and going, what is this, right? And, oh, wait a minute, something weird just happened. Riverside wants to allow, okay. Did I disappear for a second?
No.
Oh, okay. I just had this thing come up, and you shrunk, and then there were words that I didn't understand, and right.
Right.
So that's the first thing. That's the first thing to really get about it, is like, it really was something that kind of that came upon us, right? And we were fortunate enough to notice it and hone in on it. But if I take it before all that, so like a little bit of my background to kind of make it make sense. Born into alcoholic parents, amazing people, and then everything that went with addiction, with that. Had an incredible grandfather who was a strange father, but he was an amazing grandfather. And he was kind of like the point of safety, but also a point of extreme. He really nurtured a sense of wonder in me And he used to pick me up from school. I spent a lot of time there, right? Then when I was about 11, my parents got sober and they realized they couldn't stay sober in Chicago. The IRS, like they didn't pay we had this big business and they didn't pay the IRS for like 6 years, right? So we had to like, business got confiscated and all this kind of stuff. And we went from the upper middle class suburbs of Chicago to Cottonwood, Arizona, living in a trailer park with my parents brand newly sober. And I didn't understand what was happening at the time, but like leaving my grandfather, right, ripped open the ground for me, right? I had a kind of an existential crisis that I had no idea or no capability of understanding, other than I was just having like panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And you know, here I am with my two parents that like are the most unsafe beings in the world. And as they like in AA, they talk about the only thing that's worse than like a wet alcoholic is a newly sober one, right?
Yeah.
However, in when we moved to Cottonwood, they really threw themselves into AA, and it really became their connection and their social life, right? They got super involved. And I remember there was one moment, I think it was either they had a bunch of their new AA friends on the porch or they were having an actual meeting. I don't remember what it was. But I tuned into the conversation, and it was they were having a conversation that was unlike any other conversation I had ever heard before, right? And I think all conversations were either being screamed at or idle talk, right? Talking about this, that, or the other thing. Especially, I'm from the Midwest, so it's like, you know, I listened to my aunt talk about her old Kirby vacuum cleaner for 3 hours the last time I was in Chicago, right? But I immediately recognized that this was so different, because for the first time I was hearing people do things like talk about what something was like the experience of something, like how, not just about the thing, but how the thing affected them, right? Not just what they saw, but the way they were seeing. And it was a different kind of language, but mostly it was a distinctively different world. And I remember I was like in the middle of one of these like anxiety attacks that were overcoming me, that I was of course hiding because I just felt like not safe with anything. And I felt this, I kept getting these bottom dropping sensations like in my solar plexus. And I remember having that and hearing that conversation. And I just had a knowing that whatever was happening over there was somehow connected to this sensation dropping out in my stomach. And I was just like, all right. And I just went and sat down and entered that conversation. And I don't think I've come out since. Right. I think what that really gave me in some sense is a visceral feeling, right? An existential feeling for that a world could happen in a relationship, right? Like that actually something incredible could happen, right? That has far-reaching implications, right? To how we position ourselves in the universe, right? Like I'd never experienced that before. And I think that really gave me a deep sense for that. And basically, you know, all through high school, I was also, you know, I was, you know, a star athlete and, you know, was kind of popular and all that kind of stuff in high school. But I actually would go home from school and I was not interested in any like my friends from school. I was like into the old dudes that my dad was hanging out with and having deep talks and so I would have these people, really wise people that I think could intuit, they can intuit me tuning in, And so some of them would just kind of take me under their wing for a period of time, right? And they would just kind of pour themselves into me. And I've had that throughout my whole life, right? Through my whole teenagers and my 20s, all the way into my 30s, where something like I've been very fortunate this way, where like just really wise people would just kind of take me in, and then they would just pour it all into me, right? In this really generous way. And so that's kind of like, that's my, and so by the time I was like 12, 13, I'm meditating and I'm praying and I'm reading self-help books and I'm doing all of this stuff, right? The only unfortunate part of that, I would say, is it made me really awake and aware heading into puberty. I would not recommend that. I would not recommend being awake and aware while you're in puberty. My God, like you're just nuts when you're in puberty, right? Like, and I was so conscious of it, right? Like it was the mood swings and, and so it was like, it was also tumultuous, right? Being aware. There were so many contradictions involved, right? And so that's kind of, I would say, is like my kind of spiritual, developmental ground and how that woke up for me. Then I moved to San Francisco to go to art school in 1992. And I met somebody by a guy named Mitch DeArmond, and he invited me to take my first kind of like Bay Area course. Now that kind of thing was totally foreign to me, right? The word transformation and all of the like the lingo and the rhetoric of that world, I could hear it really clearly, and because it was foreign to me, like going to a place and doing a full weekend and having this whole kind of like that was all new to me. But yet I could recognize something. I can recognize a depth there. And so I took this men's weekend. It was called the Sterling Men's Weekend. It was a really strange thing. But out of that, I became part of the after thing, right? The men's meetings afterwards. And the following course, Jerry Candelaria was in that course, and that's where we met. And at the time, I was like, so I've also been lifting weights and been, I used to compete in bodybuilding and all that kind of stuff since I was like 11. So I was kind of like, Jerry was really scared of me. Because I had this long spiral blonde curly hair, and I was just yoked, right? And I'm very much a dude, right? And he was going there because he was like, just had a kid and he'd been a hippie all his life, and he's like learning how to try to be masculine. And so he looked at me and he's like, I just can't even deal with you. Right. However, there was this intrigue, and so we started to get to know each other. And now Jerry, similar to me, right, really early on in his upbringing, he started taking, different kinds of personal growth courses as a teenager. He did all these different things, right? And then at some point, he almost became a Landmark Forum leader. Like he really got into Landmark, right? That whole organization. So he actually had all of this vocabulary from years of doing the basically like, just the post 60s, Big Sur, all that stuff, right? He was like a human potential movement child, right, of it. That had just had a baby, and then was realizing he had to actually kind of become responsible, and grew up and realized he had no idea how to do that, right? So I met him right there. And he had developed a community actually with Erwan Devon. Are you familiar with Erwan Devon? So
Yeah.
Erwan and Nicole were really best friends. They kind of come from the same kind of background of that Morehouse University welcome consensus, right? That kind of sexuality way of seeing things, right? And him and Erwan attempted to do a number of courses around stuff like that and create a community. And so he had kind of a community of people that he knew, and all these people, right, all took psychedelics, right? They all were doing these courses. They all had this unique vocabulary that was really intriguing to me, that I could hear, but it was novel. And basically Jerry started inviting me to different things, right? And we really started to bond and really connect. And I started connecting with his friends, and that there was something about me that like was coming from a similar but a real different place that stood out to Jerry and kind of intrigued Jerry. And so as we started hanging out, I started getting more involved with his friends, as I'm going to art school. We started to just, when we would hang out, we would just start to drop in together. And usually it would start by like, Jerry is really kind of neurotic and controlling, right? So he, something wasn't going, like something wasn't being some way that he wanted, right? And his, little butthole would get tight, and I'd be like, and the other person would resist him, and maybe I'd do something like, "Hey, what's that?" What, Jerry? Why are you squeezing your butt so hard? Your eyes are sticking out, right? As you're trying to say these like authority things to him, like, are you feeling something? And it maybe would start off as an argument, but then it would just start to open up, right? It would start to open up. It'd leave the level of the argument, and then something else started to happen where it not only would like something would resolve with the argument, we left the level of the argument. And there was something about the leaving that level of the argument that somehow made transparent the depth of the two people in it, right? In a way that we could start to see something that we hadn't been able to see before, that was connected to something so important to them. And we started to recognize this kind of beauty that would come up, right? And then it would bring something up for the next person, and they would kind of go through something, and this kind of beauty would start to come up, right? And we, at first, it was really, really, it was just amazing. Time would disappear. We'd be hanging out for like 2 days straight. We'd miss work, right? Because whatever was happening was real. It was so obviously real. And that just started to happen spontaneously, right, with all of us when we got together. And I'd say that went on for about maybe a year, where it just would just kind of happen amongst each other. And then there was one particular night that really things kind of consolidated. And it was essentially like it was my first Burning Man in 1998. And me and Jerry and some of our friends at the time were walking around, and I think it was then Chris Jones, or he's now Damian Jones, who's like a classic like ADD7 on the Enneagram, right? So like, if you ever want to get irritated, just like walk around with like an unpresent 7 at Burning Man, because it's like the next thing is always the most amazing thing, and like, but then there's that thing, right? So that's Damien, right? And there's Jerry wanting to like keep everyone together, and we're doing something together, and like, so you could just imagine how that went. And so Damien just shoots off into the sex camp. And Jerry's like, "Hey, we're doing something together." And it's just like, "Oh God, okay, let's go fish out Damien." So we go through all these bodies, fish out Damien, right? Like, and we're walking along, and we end up way in the middle of the playa. And of course, a very playa-like thing, right? Just randomly, we come across this art teepee thing, this kind of fractal spiral teepee thing. I don't know what to call it. And so we just sat around in a circle. And I think I got interested in what that thing was, right? Because of the tension, and they started talking about it. And at some point, that thing happened, and something opened up that left the level of the conflict, right? And it was something about Damien and something core about Damien. And then all of a sudden, we started to see Damien, right, in this way. And then it turned to the next person, and then the kind of something similar happened, right? And then it turned to the next person, and it turned out that like Jerry and I in particular started to kind of like, without even thinking about it, we just started to kind of facilitate it. I would call it facilitated now. It wasn't, I didn't have a word for it then. But that happened probably like 15 hours went by. I know the sun was totally down, and it was like high noon or something. By the time we kind of popped out, we realized like, whoa, we've been here for like 15 hours. And we were walking away from it. And there was this moment where Jerry was like, we were all kind of speechless, right? Walking, in the middle of nowhere, trying to find our camp. And Jerry was like, wait. And he's like, wasn't that like, and he pointed back to where we were. And I was like, yeah, that. I pointed back, but we didn't have a word. He's like, yeah, that's really kind of the thing that we've been kind of that, right? It was like literally like that. And at a certain point, at the same time, I remember this, it's clear as day. We both stopped, we looked at each other, and we just spontaneously at the same time brought our hands out and shook hands and just committed to it.
Wow.
And we had no idea what that meant. We didn't know what that was, but that was a thing that we could point to, right? And whatever it was, we're just going to commit to it, right? We had no idea what that actually meant, but the felt sense was one of the most realest moments of my life, right? And I would say that would be the moment that it first really came together. And I'd say like, what we couldn't really say then, like how I would say it now is like what our fingers were intuiting and pointing to was something like, yeah, this is deep and profound in this way that's distinct from all the other deep and profound things we were into at the time. Like something was distinct here. And so we went and walked into the camp, and like out of that, we started getting together with our friends up at Harbin, right? And it took a couple of courses to realize what everything kind of correlated around. We'd start circling. And at some point, the name circling came involved. And then it started to really take form of, oh, it's circling that we're doing. And then out of that came the Arte experience, right? Which was the first kind of container that it was held in. And we would do these Arte experiences, is what we call them, up in Northern California in this like ranch, this beautiful ranch. We do it like every 4 to 6 weeks. And what was interesting is in the beginning, people would take the course and then they'd come back to be on what we call the source team, to be to assist the course. And it got to the point, right, where the source team, I think that we had one course at one point where there was like 8 participants in the course and 80 people on the source team. Right? Because also what was happening at the same time is we started the men's circle that was out on the beach, and now that's still going. There were women's circles that were started, right? There was this whole ethos that started to kind of self-organize around. Now, kind of like imagine this too. What's also in the zeitgeist in the air is you're having this .com boom at the same time. So you're having people who are really smart, really young, who are doing this new thing that they're calling startups, right? And that bred a certain kind of openness, and it also brought a lot of intelligence, right, at the same time. I remember one of the guys that was integral to the initial psilocybin research at Johns Hopkins, the thing that kind of had the line crossed that now we're hearing about it everywhere, was kind of done undercover, and they worked around the legalities and did the first psilocybin studies, right? That guy was circling and in the middle of all of that, right? Like so many things like that was happening, right? So there was this kind of sense of anything's possible at that time, right? And something really new was happening. And you could kind of feel that in the air, right? So in some sense, like circling was also happening inside of that and expressing that kind of spirit, if you will. We had, Jerry was a raver growing up, and then he got me totally addicted to house music. Right. So we'd have these parties. We had the gratitude party like every couple of months, right? And we'd just pack it up, and then everyone would go take the course, and we would run it like we'd run the course, right? It was this whole thing that was happening that had this like through line that was just amazing. It was really, really amazing. It was a phenomena of the kinds of people that it drew in. And that's basically kind of like how it got started, was that environment, right?
Is this conversation fascinating or what? If you're enjoying hearing Guy talk about the history of circling, and there's probably no one better to talk about the early days of the practice than Guy Sengstock himself, then you have to really be grateful to our supporters who went to patreon.com/thecontainer and committed to making small monthly contributions. You can be one of them if you're not already. And there are plenty of other ways to support us too. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. I know that you haven't yet, so go ahead and do it. Leave a comment below about how circling has impacted your life or questions you have about the circling practice. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a rating and review. If everyone who listened to this show left a glowing rating and review, the world would be overwhelmed by enlightenment overnight, and all problems would be revealed as the fickle flickers of Maya that they truly are, as we all ascended to higher and higher planes of being. But seeing as y'all haven't done that yet, we'll have to wait. Thank you for y'all's support. It really means a lot. And now here's the rest of our interview with Guy Sengstock.
Levitating over here. First of all, shout out to late 90s ravers, because that was a very integral part of my development in the late 90s. Was, at least in the East Coast, I was more of the East Coast style, house music. And then also just getting to hear this story from you is like, just, I can't tell you the level of gratitude I'm feeling in this moment of, like, we've talked to so many people, and so many people have like copies of a story that's similar to this, but we're hearing it from you.
Yeah.
And it just feels like, wow, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Privilege. And I would say that, like, the next thing that started to happen was, it got to the point where, the courses were getting so full, right, that Jerry and I were like, we need to start training people for this. And so, the Beavis and Butthead of transformation, what do? They just like, well, let's start a 2-year course, right? Like, and we'll train them how to do this, right? Like, having no idea what exactly we're doing. And I remember getting those people together, committed for 2 years to meet once a week, and come and do the courses with us. And I remember sitting down in front of them And it was kind of like Jerry and I both looked at each other, and we looked at them, and then we looked at each other, and I think it was the moment we both realized we actually had no idea how we did circling. Like, it was strange. Like, in that moment, I recognized that, oh my God, because all of this happened. It taught us by doing it, right? Being in the presence of it. But we didn't have a way of actually articulating it like explicitly. And of course they already knew that, but we couldn't quite admit it, right? So what we ended up doing for the first 2 years is we just circled the shit out of them, right? And just hope for the best, right? In a lot of ways that worked out really well. And in some ways that didn't work out so well, right? And then as like kind of things unfolded, right? It kind of got to this point, right, where I'm like, so for me, and this is where kind of Heidegger comes along, right? You were asking about Heidegger last time, right? In philosophy. The problem is that like this thing that kept happening, we only had the linguistic hands that we had to try to pick it up, right? And mostly I'd say we had like personal growth language hands, we had like kind of landmark hands, we had, personal development hands, big sir hands, right? Like that kind of language. And it could actually pick up a lot of it. It could grab a hold of and stand up a lot of it. But for me, it did not at all address the center of it, the core of it. And that, I think it's just my particular weird, angle on life that really, really bothered me, right? And intrigued me and perplexed me. And so I started in the middle of this. I lived across the street from a Barnes and Noble in North Beach, California, in North Beach, right at the edge of Fisherman Wharf, and right on Bay Street, across the street, they had a Barnes and Noble. And so I just started going to Barnes and Noble, and I just picked up Being in Time, right? And I just happened to pick up the hardest, like, philosophy book by all philosophical standards throughout all time that you could read.
They should really put that behind glass, and you should have to get an employee to check your ID and unlock that.
Totally. I think some of the people that went to Landmark mentioned Heidegger. That's probably what had me pick it up. And I opened it up, and I could not understand a word I was reading. But something about it, right? Something about it was mysterious to me, and it was saying something that I could kind of sense, and I could definitely sense that I didn't understand it, but it was, I don't know, it compelled me to just keep reading, right? And for the first 100 pages, I remember the first 100 pages, I could not figure out what Dasein was, right? Dasein is basically his word for human being. I remember trying to think, what does this word mean? Dasein, what is it? I almost kind of got at it from the back door. And I now realize what was happening there, right? Was he had a language that he was using, and a way, right, of holding things, right? It was a language that basically, phenomenological language basically addresses what is most near to us, the most ordinary things in the world, right? Seeing, listening, right? What is it to be a person, right? And as Heidegger would say that, and actually, the thing that's most concealed to us is not the thing beyond the horizon. It's what's most near. The nearer it is, the less we see it. And you can start to hear this, right? You start to think about the listening in what it is to listen to somebody in circling, right? we're catching sight of what is somehow prior to us, but we come out of, right? Um, and and so like reading Heidegger was this weird obstacle course that just kept trying to do that, right? It was almost like climbing a particular tree, right? It was more kinesthetic than it was intellectual. But doing that over and over and over again and getting like way too caffeinated and like spending hours like reading Heidegger, like racking my brains and meeting Merceau Ponte and this whole kind of phenomenological language, but more than that, inclination to care about or to notice that the most determining things are the things that are most withdrawn. And that orientation was integral, right, in how circling started to really articulate itself, right? And by that, I don't mean that like everyone started talking about Heidegger. In fact, I was the only one reading Heidegger, right? Like it was more like it wasn't like and I don't until level 3 start torturing people with like reading philosophy. Um, so it's not like that. It's more like this fundamental orientation to what we dwell in, and understanding that those things that are most intimate to us are also the most withdrawn, right? And so, how does one see the back of their eye? How does one behold that? There's a certain attitude. There's a certain come from, and I felt like reading really, really articulated that come from, and that really afforded me to be able to start to articulate what this thing like all the thing like getting someone's world, right? Like this notion of people world, right? Like get getting and in this sense this is why I don't think circling is psychology. It's not therapy, right? And I think that uh whenever people would ask me the question about like, well, what's the difference between circling and something like therapy, because there's a lot of ways that it looks a lot very similar in so many ways. And I always knew it was different, but I was never satisfied with my answer, right? Maybe they were, but I never was satisfied with my answer to that until I started to really attempt to distinguish, right, and bring into language the underlying logos or the pattern of what circling was, right? Once I was able to start doing that, then I'm like, okay, now we can not just transmit this. Now we can actually teach some of it, right? But that took years. Like I have to say, I have more respect for what it takes to take something deeply embodied and implicit and make it and bring it into language. Man, that's difficult. Like it's trying to see your own eyeball, right? You're usually the most delusional like about it at all, right? So it really took a long time to do that. But once I did that, I was like, okay, now we can teach this. Um, so and about that time is when Arte, for a bunch of different reasons, really completed itself. And I remember having this moment when it did. Um, there were a bunch of people involved with running it at the time, and we had one more meeting to see if we wanted to go forward with it, right? And we basically concluded not. And I remember going into the center that we had in San Francisco at the time, and I walked in and I sat down and I like just sat in the middle of the course room, right, in this wooden floor. It was completely empty, and it was just me, and I'm just sitting with, all right, Arate, right? This thing that like, I've just been basically kind of dedicating my life to is done. Like trying to comprehend this. And I had this moment with this strange sense of like, God, of all the people that were involved with this, it's me sitting here. Like, what? what that's not what I would have expected, right? And all of a sudden I started to have this experience, this realization of that actually maybe what arate was, that the point of arate wasn't arate, right? It actually, like, what arate was the first container of something something extraordinarily to develop. And then all of a sudden it was like I had this have you ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense? Remember that with Bruce Willis, right? He's dead through the whole movie, right? No one recognizes it in the theater. My ex-wife, of course, like knew it from the first second, but I didn't know it, right? You just get like, God, something's weird about this movie. What is it? Like, and then right at the end of the movie, I don't remember what happens, but out of the corner of his eye, he realizes, oh shit, I'm dead, right? And then the whole audience realized, oh my God, you're dead. And there's this moment of right. And then the movie like goes back to the first scene of the movie and all of the main scenes of the movie, and it was fucking obvious the whole time, right? It was just concealed. It was undistinct. I felt like I had one of those moments, right? Where this whole time I've been so focused on the organization and running the business and like making all of that happen, and then all of a sudden I realized like maybe that wasn't actually what was happening. Right? Maybe the thing that actually this was doing was homing a practice, right? This thing called circling. And then it was like I looked all the way back, right? Like to the very beginnings of things, and I saw the through line that was undistinct to me until then. It was like it kind of rewrote the whole history in that moment. And of course, that like went into the future. I was like, oh, and it became instantly clear what there was to do. And that was the first circling training. That was the first circling training. That started to incorporate a lot of the things like, the seven stages of 7 facets of circling and all the different practices and all the things that we do to teach it now. And that was the beginning, right? Of circling being something that wasn't housed in an organization, right? But it was something that like actually was that organization held it to develop, and then it gave birth.
This intellectual project of actually grasping the seemingly ineffable heart of this practice of circling,
mm-hmm.
and then finding the frameworks for it to make sense enough to you to be able to actually say it to someone else.
Yeah.
It's so. I think for anyone who circles that, well, I don't know if it's true for everyone, but I know for me, like that is such a big part of how circling has developed me is intellectually, actually.
Yeah.
Like getting me to actually understand on fully in my full channel, like from my body all the way up to my brain and wherever else.
Yeah.
And like finding the right maps to, I really like this language you're talking about, like having the words to actually pick up what is going on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and what we were experiencing, like I had to get new hands.
Right. When the person who taught us circling he's a brilliant guy, but he's very like connected to the kind of like personal growth language,
mm-hmm.
like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember having to go through my own process of like I had to go reach back in like language from like mystics and people practicing magic and alchemy and
mm-hmm.
Like that stuff for me in my experience felt like it that captures what
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what I'm doing, at least here in the
Yeah.
circle, is like, I
Yeah.
think we're doing magic, like real magic.
Right.
And this is about God. That's what this is.
Yeah.
And like getting there and getting your hands underneath it.
Hmm.
I'm just like right there with you in your story. I'm like, yeah, dude,
Yeah.
to me, that's almost the fucking practice. And the circling is the like
Yeah.
the occasion to do that.
Yeah. It's almost like the relationships of the booby prize, right? Like the gift is something like God, right?
Right. I think I've forgotten what circling is as many times as I've learned.
Yeah.
Like
I relate to that.
I'm listening to you two, and I'm going like, I mean, granted, you know, Jonathan and I started a podcast on the subject, but I don't know that I have ever tried to figure it out. I mean, it's probably true that I have tried to figure it out, but I think that like I almost kind of reject it, the trying to figure it out. I'm
Yeah.
like, let's just be here now,
Yeah.
guys. Like, don't try and figure it out.
Yeah.
But I also the project of trying to figure it out
Yeah.
is also very compelling.
Totally.
I don't know, but I'm kind of just laughing as I'm listening to both of you, because I'm like, I don't know, that pursuit it just seems inexhaustible.
Yeah, inexhaustible. Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the thing, you know, going back to that, like when I realized, I was like, oh, I know why this isn't therapy, or what distinguishes that. It's funny is when I was doing, we developed these self-study courses, right, for it. You know, I've only done circling live, right? And so we developed these self-study courses for the first couple of stages. And I was distinguishing these, what we call like the four facets of essentially like deeply getting someone. And I think about the facets are these kind of innate human qualities, right? That you can deepen kind of infinitely, or what you draw from, right, to really get another's world. And one of them is empathy. The other one is compassion. The third one is understanding. And the fourth one is wonder. And it was really like in that video, like really getting into what wonder is, that I was like, this is it. This is why, right? Because wonder is this really interesting thing. You know, they talk about, like Socrates said, like philosophy only begins in wonder, right? And and I think you can appreciate this. It's kind of like, and how I tried to get at it was like, okay, you know, distinguish wonder from like curiosity, and wonder from something like astonishment or awe, right? I think it's probably all a continuum. But if you think about curiosity, something like curiosity is more like hunger, right? Like you don't know something, you want to know it. You're curious about it, right? But there's that sense of like, we all know that, like we on the web, we get some, like we hear about some like herb or something that's like make us live longer, whatever. We just get do a whole thing about it, right? And at some point we get familiar enough, and they're like, okay, you're like, where did time go? Right? So curiosity is really more bound and more determinate in that way, right? That like if you just sit here and I just increase like your curiosity and turn the dial up and up and up, it actually gets more and more unpleasant, right? And then the other side of it would be something like awe or astonishment. And awe is really like where the world does most of the work, right? It's when the sunset is so fucking spectacular that literally it shatters your mind, right? You do not have the categories to contain the thing that's seizing you in the moment. It's like, it's awe. It's usually what it's really on the side of the thing that you're in awe of that just shatters your mind, right? And like then it reconfigures a little bit more inclusive or complex or something, right? You know, awe is wonderful. But wonder is something distinct, right? Wonder is that like a common experience of wonder is usually this. It's like at some point, you grow up with your mom and your dad, right? And they're your mom and your dad, and you kind of know that they're people too, right? Like you kind of get that sense, and you go off to college or something, and you come back one summer, and you're sitting across from them, and you're drinking coffee, and all of a sudden your mom says something, and you're like, "Wait, you're a person."
Yes.
Whoa, right? Like you're a person, right? Like, and it's a strange moment because in that moment you see something that's always been true, but you simultaneously see that you hadn't seen it, that there was more to what met the eye that was right in front of you, right? But it was concealed, right? And then you kind of have this moment where you go back and you're like, oh God, you know, I just through this whole time she's been this person, right? Like, and it's been behind this little closed door and it just opened. And there's this, so it's like, it's not like awe shattering, and it's not like I'm hungry for something. Awe is that moment where a little door opens that's always been there. You've just never seen it. And it doesn't reveal the whole thing, but it reveals something mysterious that has a, a drawing quality, right? It draws you into it, right? That's wonder, right? That sense of like, oh, what is most ordinary has a hidden depth that just opened up. That's I have to say that like I have to say that like circling without wonder isn't circling. That's the bottom, right? Of like the why and the what for and what has us, right, do this. I think is out of a sense of wonder for the sake of the wonderful, right? That and it's that experience, right? That virtue or that experience. One sense that like wonder just happens to us, right? But there is a way where we see we all there's also something of us involved, like where I can wonder about you, right? There is a way that like I can bring a sense of wonder or an openness to it that in itself invites those doors to be open. And like when you're in wonder, there's this experience of like it's not a means to an end. It's like kind of like you get a sense of the end in itself, right? Like there's a sense of like this is for its own sake because it's somehow shining forth a light that is what has everything, right? Be infinite everything it is, right? You get a piece of that in a way that has you coupled to it, participate in it, drawn into it, right? And I was like, God damn it, there it is. That's why, right? I, it only took me like 25 years, but I fucking finally have a satisfying answer about that.
It has me thinking about this journey you've been on, and then also not just developing the practice of circling, but also stewarding the practice and creating the Circling Institute. And I was telling Sai there would be a riot if I didn't take the opportunity to ask you about challenges you've experienced in
Yeah.
that part of it, like of building a practice and
Yeah.
the structures around it.
Totally. Yeah. I would say, first of all, this is a really weird thing we're doing. It's a really strange thing, right? Like, in the space, if you want to call it the space that things like this happen in, I think is even more strange, right? Like, there's really a Bay Area thing, right? Like, and it's interesting because it, I would say one of the things that's been kind of strange to me is there's something about what's happened in the last 5-10 years in this space that I started noticing kind of like a weird moral weight to it. Like, I think it had something to do with the whole woke thing that really kind of came in big, like this this kind of self-righteousness, right? That people come in with their thoughts about things and like they're adamant about not having any kind of rules or facilitation or whatever their thing is, right? But yet it's got this weird kind of ironic oppression or this kind of like weird moral certainty over the top of it that wasn't there like in the first 10 years, right? So I think that there's something, I don't even know what to make of that, right? Exactly. But I've noticed that it's become strangely political, right? And moralistic in this strange way. In a way that I actually haven't been able to relate to, right? Or even understand what's happening around it. So there's that part that's just been, I'm like, what is this actually? The other thing too is that's been weird is like kind of where I'll go to things that where people are doing circling and I'll go and visit this thing. I can't recognize it. I'm like, what is this? Right? Like, um, that's strange to me, right? Like, and like people even people writing books that write the history of circling that it's not the history of circling, right? And then they're total assholes about it, right? Like like stuff stuff like that, right? Was not what was on my radar about circling. Um, so I think it's like it's been strange, right? Like when, for example, people come and they do a circling thing, right? And they look at me and they're like, "This isn't circling," and I'm kind of like, I don't even respond to it. I'm just like, the conversations is so strange to me, right? So there's a kind of weird way that like I think people have taken on circling, or they'll come like maybe they'll come and do like a drop-in event or they'll do a weekend and then they'll start a circling school, right? And I think because it, and what that ends up being is the mishmash of all the things that they were into, calling it circling. And so my attitude to the whole thing. In fact, you can hear me talk about like, yeah, open source, this whole thing. Like, let's just let it spread. Let's let it spread, right? Um, and that was my attitude for the longest time. And especially when I started to do stuff on YouTube and I became a little bit more public facing, like I would do things like I would talk about circling, right? And I would get letters or emails from people saying, "Yeah, I looked up circling in my town," and they're like, "What the hell was that? That was nothing like what you were talking about," right? Um, and that's put me like I would say that it's so strange because for me, I have a s- I like I am well, the big five tests, introvert, extrovert, conscientious, openness, agreeableness, all those things. I don't know if you've noticed, but I broke it because I'm so fucking agreeable. I I was like 103% agreeable, and it just broke the big five. Um, I it I'm super. I'm super open minded. It's just my temperament, right? Like I don't like running shit. Like I'm really clumsy with logistics. I don't like thinking about this kinds of stuff, right? So my inclination is just to let it. let it go and let it be. That's kind of my temperament. So it's been strange to find myself being like, some of my fears around circling have to do with that there was something really original that happened, that was something distinctive, right? That had I watched it. It had a structural, functional organization to it that I kept seeing, right? We all saw it, right? And it was distinct. And a lot of that, I would say, has to do with the ground of it is a profound kind of listening and also kindness, right? Um, and so when I see those things kind of totally missing, I'm like, it looks like something else. And that something else may be even more cool than circling. But it's like I'm going, is that actually that thing? And so one of my fears has really been has been about like, it's especially after Jerry died. So Jerry died about 5 years ago. And it, there's been a sense with him, right, since he's died, of kind of having a feeling like another like kind of responsibility, right, to do my best bet, right, so that when I die, I kick off the boat, and the boat is likely to stay together, right, and keep going. And I think one of my fears is that if anything relational you can call circling, all of a sudden that word starts to lose meaning, right? And so that's been a perplexity of mine for a long time, right? Like of because on one level there's like a thing where it's like, well, I mean, I don't fucking own it. I never felt like I owned it. Like it just happened, right? We kind of, you know, we were kind of like dumb enough to go, what's that? Right? Like at some level. So it's not like I have a sense of like I want to hold on to something, but I want it. There's something really special and unique here that I think I wanted to go on, right? And so that's been some of the difficulties for me. That makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. We just there's because we came up so much like within this last 5 years, like is when we learned like that you're describing and and doing research and looking into the Circling Institute and the methodology and the stages and the way that practice is held, and then knowing the way that we learned it and that there's differences. But then we just recently, got an invite to a practice called circling, which is actually a completely different practice that takes place in prisons, and it has different names, but they're calling it circling. And I'm like, wow, I can see how this can get really misconstrued. And someone who for the first time is hearing, oh, that we have a podcast about circling, and then they're like, oh, we do circling, and then there's just been a lot of instances where it's like, wait, we so yeah, I totally get it.
I also I noticed too, like, I feel there is like the strangeness you were naming. I had a lot of empathy for the strangeness of like this thing that you midwifed into the world, and then were kind of spirit gave you the job of like doing that, and then it taking these shapes that you're, maybe it's okay, maybe not, but it's like this isn't the and like I have so much empathy there. And then I also realize, like, the reason I got into circling, like I didn't have any money when I got into circling.
Yeah.
I could, and as like a lifelong dyed in the wool red like commie punk, the Bay Area, that stuff, I never would have found it if I had to look to like that subculture for it. And it's like, and I found it because it had been kind of jailbroken in a way and was done in this kind of, like punk rock way. And like, so my heart, it's like, but I'm holding both of those things and I'm moving into the mystery of that, I guess.
Yeah, totally. It's like Bloss said, I had a conversation with Bloss about all this, and he was like, yeah, maybe it's a feature and not a bug, right? I could totally see that too, right? So it's kind of like, I feel whatever it is that, however it is that I respond to this, I'm sure it's going to be imperfect, right? Like, because there's really, at the end of the day, I mean, like, at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised no matter what I do, whatever I do, the thing is going to happen anyways, right? Like, that wouldn't surprise me either, right? Here I think I'm keeping something together or something, and then it just keeps going, right? Like in some way that I couldn't even comprehend, But yeah, it's interesting. But it's something about like, it's been interesting to be inside of this and like really have concerns that I'm just not normally used to having. It's been really uncomfortable. Yeah. And how to be, because there's this level of like, I want to be responsible to it, right? But then I'm responsible for it, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to be responsible to it, but then but then it's me being responsible for it, right? So it's like, I have issues with that.
In the I Ching, there's a particular hexagram 29 that really speaks to this idea of the shadow of half-heartedness. Like, what is it to be half-hearted? And then when you're like, okay, I'm gonna be fully, and it goes back to this idea of commitment and devotion.
Yeah.
Like, okay, but now I'm so I am actually fully committed. That means that I'm the one that is committed.
Yeah.
There's no that deep responsibility is so profound. It reminds me of parenting as well.
Totally.
Totally. I've spent so many years, like, I think I spent a lot of my life wanting to become a parent. And then once I was like, I am like probably the least cut out for this job. Like, I don't know why I pursued this with such intensity. Here I am, like, I'm not really a big fan of parenting. I'm not good at parenting. And then coming around to, it's because I'm not actually like allowing myself to be fully responsible because of how scary it is to be actually responsible. Scary. But also extraordinarily rewarding, and really the most rewarding of all things.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I was gonna say, wow, that sounds like being a parent. I feel unqualified for this. Why did I want this? Tells me you're a parent.
This is a full-time job, guys. Just so you know, there's like no days off.
Exactly.
Well, maybe like as a parent of circling, I'm wondering if here at the end, if you, I almost want to get your vision for like circling grown up, like what it like. Like what's the future horizon?
So it's hard to say what this looks like, but I can tell you my sense about it is that I see circling really participating in this time, right? Of one recognizing that there's a kind of crisis in relationship right now, right? So it's like I see it as existing and in being aware of that, and in some sense helping shape what it means to have relationships now that are ones that you actually choose, are ones that you take on, that it becomes a real thing in which you nurture and take care of, right? I feel like I kind of feel into the movement of it. Like I feel like that's kind of the telos, if I were to make a guess, right? It's like there's something about it. It's interesting because I've noticed in the last number of years, it's been less on, I don't know, specifically more courses or bigger courses or more things. And I think that'll still go on. But it's more like, for what sake? I think it's for the sake of that, right? I think it's for the sake of that. I think it's for the sake of having people, as they come to recognize through the crisis of losing it, as you talked about earlier. I appreciated the way that you're saying that, right? To then bring, like, to take that up again, and what that looks like, who really knows? But I kind of feel like that circling is already has its hand grabbing in that direction. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that has me, talk to people like John Vervaeke, right? And some of these kind of thought leaders and philosophers, and to kind of develop practices in that way. I'm also talking with a lot of people in AI, some of the like some of the big thinkers and shakers and movers in AI, and like really close in on that conversation, right? Because I think that has something to do with this in some way that I don't understand. But there's a part of me that's like kind of, I can feel myself inspired by and plugged into this kind of more meta futuristic conversation of that are where we're all kind of acknowledging how weird everything is and the future of that, and that we may want to think about it a little bit. Right. So it's kind of like there's one foot in like the world of circling, and there's one foot in the world of I don't know what you call that other thing, right? But like kind of bridging those together or making that connection. That's where I noticed my inspiration has really moved to and moved in. Yeah.
It feels calming to my system that you'll be a public intellectual in that discussion. I'm bringing a circling, informed perspective there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yay.
Thank you so much for obviously coming on to the container, but also just for your work. Yeah, it has saved my life, circling.
Yeah, I just want to say that something just in the couple of hours of knowing you, deeply knowing you, there's this way that you were squinting, going like, something about AI, and I don't know what that quite is. I'm like, oh, then you're there. Like, there's something about Guy that if he's squinting and going like, this is probably like, what was it, Heidelberg? What's the guy, the philosopher you were talking about? Heidegger. And so you're like, I don't know what any of this means, but I'm pretty sure it's extremely important. There's some way
that shape over there.
Operating system. Yeah. It's like, there's something really probably important about that over there.
Yeah.
That just seems like a way that you operate, or how I'm getting to know you. And
oh, thanks for saying that. Yeah, both of you. Fully received. Yeah, it's great being with you guys. Happy to do this anytime you want. This is great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to take us out?
Oh, yeah. The container is now closed.
Boom.